What's up guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I'm going to take a stab at doing the ultimate beginner tutorial for making your first electronic song in Reaper. I'm going to walk you through the interface briefly. There have been other people who have probably done better, more in-depth explanations than I can give, but I want to just show the process and talk you through kind of what you'll need and how to go about it. So let's start off by right-clicking and inserting a new virtual instrument on a new track. You can start with drums, you can start with synths, you can kind of start with whatever you want. In this case, I'm going to start with a synth. So let me quickly talk you through the concept of plugins. A plugin is essentially a small program that runs within a bigger program. You've got instruments, effects, and all that kind of stuff. So a virtual instrument is one kind of plugin, and then there are also effects plugins that you can add to shape that sound, and there are a bunch of built-in plugins that come with Reaper, many of which are quite good, and then I've augmented those with a couple that I've gotten for free that I will talk you through in a bit, and a couple that I've paid for. But I'm going to try to stick to free plugins since you're probably just getting into this and want to see if producing electronic music is even for you or something you want to pursue further. So ignore the rather staggering number of virtual instruments I've got in here. In this case, I'm going to go for Helm, which is a free synthesizer plugin. So this is the interface. It looks somewhat intimidating, but for starters, we can just go to presets. So these are sounds already created with the synth that you can go in and use and tweak to your heart's content. So I'm going to start off with some kind of lead here and just pick one at random and see how that sounds. That'll work. And I've got a MIDI keyboard here. This is not necessary, but it can help, especially if you're used to a more hands-on approach to making music. But I'll show you how to actually just program in notes in a second. So the first thing I want to do is just bring the amount of delay down because it's a bit much. So that's too little. So just, and I'm not going to tweak too many other parameters. I like this preset as it is. So let's go ahead and change our BPM, aka the speed of our song, to 128 beats per minute. This is kind of the standard EDM tempo. There are no hard and fast rules, but this one's very common. So I'm going to turn on my click, aka my metronome, let that record a bit. And it's way too quiet right now, so I'm going to go ahead and right click on the metronome icon and I get access to all of its parameters. So I can actually go ahead and let's just crank this so that I can hear it over this rather loud synth. Also note that in order to record, I've got this track armed. If I disarm it, I can hit buttons on my MIDI keyboard and nothing happens. If I arm it, that means it's ready to take an input. Same goes if you're trying to record an audio signal, you need to arm the track to allow it to accept a signal. In this case, it's taking MIDI, which is basically how keyboards and other stuff like that and computers talk to each other. So if I hit a note on my keyboard, it actually activates that in the computer. The keyboard itself has no sounds built in. It just sends signals to the computer and goes from there. Once again, not necessary, but I find them super useful. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I messed that up a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and edit that after the fact. To split something, you hit S on your keyboard, and then I can just delete that and move this over here. So I double click to get to the piano roll editor. The name of it's derived from actual rolls of notes that would be put into like a player piano. And then people kind of adopted that for digital audio workstations. And often people who come up using digital audio workstations will get so used to piano roll notation that they'll be able to start to audiate it, aka see what music is indicated by how these notes are laid out. I don't know how to read music, even though I know a bit of music theory, so piano roll notation is what I'm definitely used to at this point, having worked in digital audio workstations a lot. So I hold down right click and then drag to select all the notes at once, and then I can hit Q to quantize. This will tell the notes to all align perfectly to the grid and be in perfect time, so I'll hit OK. There's not really anything I need to change about that. And now I can start changing notes. Also note the little pencil icon here. If I want to put in a new note, I just hold down, boom, there's my note. And I can drag it out, all that kind of stuff. So I hit the wrong note there, or a note I didn't intend to. Let me turn off this click, it is obnoxious. So that's going to be good enough for now. I'm not really trying to make any art here. This is just purely for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to disarm this track for now and insert virtual instrument on new track again. Bring up another instance of Helm because it's free and I like using it for demonstration purposes because I can very easily recommend it. Go to bass and get a bass patch. So I'll just use that as its default for now. Bring that click back, but turn it down a bit because, oh my gosh, it was loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got this bass part here with these 2 notes, and I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. Copy and paste this as well. That way I can have this run through slightly more of a progression. Something like this. There we go. And then if I want to loop my section, I just hold down my left click, drag out this little section, and then hit the loop button down here. And may as well change these couple of notes so I have some variation. So. That will do for now. So let's jump into adding some effects. Also note that if you want to program something in completely from scratch, you can go up to Insert and hit New MIDI Item, and that will create a blank MIDI item like one of these. So let's add some effects. Let's say that I want this bass to be even more distorted than it already is. This is using a paid plugin, but there are plenty of free plugins out there that will do this. This is Defacer. It is a distortion plugin. It's pretty affordable. It gets some pretty intense effects. So once again, go back to add. I want to add an EQ. This is like a fancy version of, in your car stereo, you probably have an EQ where you can cut bass and you can cut out treble. So an EQ is that, but on a much more specific level. Think of it as volume controls for different frequencies. Let's say this has way too much bass in it. I can start to cut some of that out. Or if there's one kind of frequency in there that's like painful, so imagine like a baby crying. They cry at a frequency that's very painful for the human ear because you're supposed to be able to pick it out of any noisy environment because, oh, the baby's crying, you gotta help it out. So what you can do here is like boost around to find a painful frequency and then cut it. So that kind of hurts. So I'm going to turn that down. So that's a super quick and oversimplified introduction to EQ. And I've cut too much low in here, so dial that back. That will do for now. Once again, I'm not trying to necessarily make a banger here, just a quick thing for demonstration purposes. So now let's bring in some drums. And there are a few ways you can do this. You can either just drag in audio files and start to place them, or you can actually use plugins for this, and I'll show you both. I've got a free sample pack that I've put out that I will link in the description. No download gates or anything like that. All I ask in return is that you like this video and subscribe for more electronic music production videos. Let me pull in a kick. That'll do. So I can just grab this right here, drag it in, and it'll show me an audio file. And then if I want to have it play like a 4 on the floor pattern, I can shorten it a bit here and just start copy and pasting it along the grid, giving me The other way you can work with drums is with some kind of sampler plugin. There is a built-in one in Reaper called the Sample-O-Matic 5000, which is fun to say. So you can drag a sample in, and then you can tell it to distribute itself to your keyboard or not. You do it using this. So if I go note semitone shifted, let me drag in a sample. it'll actually map it out to my keyboard and to the piano roll so I can program notes in that way. I'm not going to do it for this one because hopefully you get the idea, but that is an option out there. And if you want, you can get external plugins that'll allow you to build up a full drum kit within one track. So I'm going to move on for now to a little bit of mixing and then a little bit of kind of building a track, but I'm going to recommend some other videos. So for layering beyond just these three elements, I'm going to point you to a Kashmir video that shows you the basic anatomy of a standard EDM drop. He breaks it down incredibly thoroughly, and I will link that at the end of this video. So moving on to a little bit more mixing, one thing I want to do now that I have a kick in here is to duck these two synth elements to the kick. So ducking, if you're unfamiliar, is having an element get out of the way of another element. The way that I like to do it, there are a couple ways you can accomplish this. One way is sidechain compression. I'm not going to demonstrate that here because that requires a bit of routing, and it's not my favorite way of getting that effect, although it's the kind of original way that people would get that effect. I'm going to use a plugin called Lfo Tool, and I'm sure there are free equivalents out there. I haven't looked, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but essentially, this curve controls the volume over time. So the easiest way to describe what's going on is just to show you visually what's going on. So if I take this even further, so if I play that with a kick, you can hear how it gets out of the way of the kick every time the kick hits, and it's just doing that on a consistent pattern, and I can do a bit of routing if I want this to actually follow a more complicated kick pattern. I especially go out of my way to do this with bass because you don't want bass frequencies of kicks and basses to fight, and it's also a good way to allow the kick to punch through. So this is the most like extreme version. I could take that even further if I wanted. So now here's our little drop. And from there, I could go ahead and add more effects, add more layers, add more percussion, especially, which this is in desperate need of if I was to be developing this into a full track. I'll demonstrate the reverb real quick because the built-in Reaper reverb is actually pretty good. And one thing to note is I just changed the order that the plugins are affecting the sound in because I want the reverb to be affected by this ducking. So I moved it under that ducking effect. And also, if you double click a parameter here, it sends it back to its kind of neutral position. So for reverb, let me solo this. Let me increase the room size. There are multiple different kinds of reverb out there. This one simulates placing your element in the middle of an actual room. So you can control the size of that room, and also you can control EQ of that reverb. So like, obviously that's a bit much. And I'll dial it back to a more reasonable level. And go from there. Moving on to the actual mixer window. Typically I mix just through this window right here because it's easy to parse. It's all right here. It's all laid out nicely. But occasionally you do want to go into your mixer, especially for the master track. Or some people call it the two bus because it has two signals, a left one and a right one, that are then brought together for your stereo output. So if you go to effects here, typically what you're going to want to put on your master is a limiter. If you're wondering why your songs are quieter than everyone else's, it's because you haven't been using compression and limiting on them. And I would try not to go too crazy with this, and there have been many videos made on the mastering process, so I am going to give you a grossly oversimplified version of here, but there's this free plugin that I really like called Loudmax, where essentially all you do is pull down the threshold and it'll start to clamp down on your mix. Essentially what's going on is that there's a certain threshold that if your audio crosses it, it distorts because it breaks it, essentially, is the easiest way to put that. What this does is it punches any audio down that passes a certain threshold, allowing you to make everything louder all at once. So I've got this on my master, so it's affecting everything at once, and I'll demonstrate what that sounds like. So here's without, here's with. And you can see how it's pressing down on the mix, especially at those peaks, like when the kick hits. And that allows it to bring everything up and makes everything appear louder. I like using Loudmax for this. Once again, that's a free plugin. And of course, there are other limiters out there. Plus, there is an incredible amount of depth to mastering your music. This is just one aspect of it that is normally not known about by people just getting into music production, so I wanted to mention it here. From here, I could do a bit of arranging, and this is the final thing that I want to demonstrate, but I'll link at the end of this video a video I did about basically how to take a little loop like this and develop it into a full song, and the exact blueprint I use and a lot of other producers use to accomplish this. I'm just gonna show you a couple of techniques real quick in Reaper specifically. So for, say, a breakdown, you don't necessarily want these gigantic synths being pumped by this kick. Maybe you just want a laid-back version of this. So let me just grab this and copy it through a few times. And we're gonna jump into some automation. So first of all, I'm gonna delete these kicks for these first couple loops. And then I'm going to remove the ducking for this section without the kick. And the way you accomplish that is with automation, which essentially takes a parameter and makes it move by itself without you having to do anything. So I go to trim for that. And you have this giant list of stuff that you can modify. And that is too much for anyone to parse. So I'll show you a shortcut in a second. But right now what I'm looking for is Lfo Tool Bypass, which is this right here. And bypass means that the stuff just passes through that plugin unaffected. It's the on and off toggle for that plugin. So right now, Lfo Tool Bypass is turned on. So I hit Shift to add a node here. Hit Shift to add another node here, add another node, and then I can move this up. So now, let me solo this, which is isolating it. No Lfo Tool. And now Lfo Tool is affecting it. Another place that I would use this is moving the cutoff of the synth or something similar. So let me demonstrate that. Let me go to Helm and see if this even has a filter on it. It does, but it's not quite the effect I want. So I'm gonna go ahead and add an EQ again, grab this band here and change this to a low pass filter, which allows the lows to pass through. And I'm gonna make sure to move this around a bit. So let me show you what that sounds like, first of all. That's the effect I'm going for, but I want to do it by itself. So now that I've moved this parameter around, I can go back to trim, which is how you get to the automation window. And I can click Show Last Touched Effects Parameters Only, which significantly pares down your options and actually lets you find what you're looking for. So in this case, it's frequency low pass. Select this. Select this. Once again, I'm holding Shift click for that, and then I can pull this down. So now it's gonna rise up over time. And I can do the same with this bass. The other thing I'm also gonna do is add a high pass. So that's gonna cut out a bunch of bass, and I'm gonna automate this one as well. So I'm gonna start off with a bunch of bass cut. I'm gonna slowly introduce the bass, and then right before this drop hits, I'm gonna cut out a bunch of bass so your ears briefly get used to hearing the track with no bass. So when the bass kicks in, it's all the more impactful. And I can show you how to do that really precisely. So we're building. So at this point, I want the bass to kick back in immediately. So I'm gonna hit Shift, add another node, bring this down, and then I can snap it right there. So this is the effect that you get. And from here, I could also go and add some kind of like riser effect, which there are a few also living in my free sample pack. Like this one, for instance. So I can drop this in here, and in this case, it's got this boom at the beginning. Turn that down, it's probably gonna be loud. And in this case, I don't want that, so Around here, it starts to actually rise, and if I select this and drag, I can introduce a fade, which is super nice. So this should be roughly right. And obviously there's a lot more I'd have to do to make that transition clean, but hopefully you get the idea. If you'd like to see a video on EDM layering, I'll link Kashmir's video. I highly recommend you give that a watch if you'd like to make kind of standard EDM tracks. And if you'd like to learn how to develop a short loop like this into a full song, you can click or tap the video lower on the screen. Hopefully you found this helpful, and if you did, I'd appreciate if you'd subscribe and hit that like button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.